How's that?
Yeah, that's good.
You hear me?
I can hear you good.
All right, great, brother. So here we are. Yeah, I typically I have two computers. One is my um work computer, and then one's my MacBook. But here we are.
Thank
So
God for backups.
absolutely, brother. Absolutely. So let's just rock and roll, man. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to first and foremost just thank you for joining me, be willing to join me here on the Prison of Promise podcast. My entire objective for
Okay.
doing this is to uh, share people's personal stories of triumph, recovery, um, with hopes of encouraging other people who have gone through the criminal legal system and are trying to find their way. Um, and so I guess I'll just ask you, man, to just jump right in and perhaps introduce yourself and tell the people where you're from and maybe how much time you did for starters.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Ready for it now?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, of course. All right, man. So my name's Joseph. I'm 31. I currently live in Jacksonville, Florida. Um, the first time I personally went to prison, it was of course because of drug addiction. That's part of my story. I was 18 years old. I served 2 years in a Florida State prison at that time. So I got out actually like 2 days before my 21st birthday. And then I went actually right back to prison when I was right before I turned 23. And I did 3 years in a Florida State prison at that time at 26. And so I've served a total of 5 years in a Florida State prison, two
Yeah.
separate sentences.
All right. And how do we pronounce your last name, Joseph?
KG, like the letter K, letter G.
KG. Okay, just kind of going backwards a little bit, but thanks for sharing that bit about your experience, Joseph. And as
Absolutely.
you said, drug addiction took you to prison, and you went to prison like twice, almost back to back. Um,
Yeah.
what do you think happened to allow you to start making transitions or changes um, to where you started coming out of, I guess, whatever those behavioral patterns were that sent you to prison?
Yeah, it's a great question, man. I once I realized that if I don't make a change, this is how my life is going to be. As crazy as it sounds, I always thought I didn't have to make, massive changes. I just had to, stop doing this a little bit and never really focused on it. We can say we want something, but I don't know how bad I wanted it, because if you looked at my actions that I was doing when I got out the first time, my actions didn't show that I wanted something different in my life, because I was doing
Hmm.
the same stuff, just
Yeah.
thinking if I'm smarter or if I do this differently. So we talk so much about what we really want, but it's all about your action. You could
Mm.
tell somebody all day long, I want to make a change. So for me, I was sitting in a 10 by 10 cell, and, in the state of Florida prison, what they do is the first time you go to prison, in front of your prison number is a 0. That means this is
Mm.
your first time in prison. You go the
Oh,
second time, which was mine, was an A. And then the third time's a B, and so on and so forth. So I'm sitting in a 10 by 10 cell in confinement with 4 months left of my prison sentence. And there's a gentleman in there, and I'll never forget this day. Every time I tell this story, I get goosebumps. He's got a K letter.
mm.
And he looks at me like directly into my eyes, almost speaking to my soul. And he says, Joseph, you're going to be just like me, man. And for some reason, when he said that to me, I just looked at this guy, and it was like a reality check. Like I've had people come to me and talk to me, but at this moment, I'm looking at him almost as if I heard it for the first time.
Mm.
Joseph, if you don't make some kind of change, you're going to end up like this guy, or even worse, you're going to end up dead.
Yeah.
So from that moment, I knew I had to make a change. And then when I started reflecting inside of that cell, there's two things I had to do. I had to reach out to a power greater than myself. I'm
Uh-huh.
a spiritual person. I've tried to do it on Joseph's terms. I've tried to
Yeah.
do it on my own strength. I never could, man. I never
Hmm.
could.
Hmm.
Even today, if you know me, I'm somebody who thinks he can accomplish everything and anything. But I
That's a
also
great
realize
attitude.
it is. It's a
Yeah.
great attitude, but sometimes it also means I don't need God.
Mm.
And there's some things that aren't meant for me to take care of. There's some
Yeah.
things I need to lean on God's strength.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did that at that moment. I leaned on God's strength. I said a prayer, and it was the first time I was honest with me also, but
Hmm.
also my higher power. And I
Hmm.
realized, okay, for me to stay out of prison and stay alive, drugs are the problem. What's going on?
Hmm.
I keep turning to, I'm not a criminal.
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not really a criminal. I'm a drug addict who committed crimes because of his addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So when I realized that, I said, okay, stealing is not my problem. I'm stealing because I'm trying to get high. And that's when
Yeah.
I started getting into the program recovery and saying I
Mm-hmm.
need to make a change.
Yeah. Yeah. That's heavy, man. That's real heavy. And you know, it makes me wonder though, like, what do you think allows you to hear this at this point in time? Like, what drove the message home to you from this gentleman versus all the other times people may have been trying to redirect your path?
Yeah, and you know what's so great about this question is that there's people out there who don't know when that time is going to come. But what I always
Mm-hmm.
say is you never know what that person that needs to hear something is going through in that moment. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, it was a couple things that happened even before this guy had this conversation.
Yeah.
So I told you I went to prison the second time for 3 months. Well,
Right.
what happened? I'm in a 10 by 10 cell. So I was getting high every day in prison.
Mm.
So they sent me to a work release program, and probably your listeners know about work release. And if they
Yeah.
don't, long story short is your last year, your sentence, you wear an ankle monitor. They give you a real job in society. You actually go out and get a job. They help you to make, you make money, you pay the center
Mm-hmm.
and you go home with some money.
Nice.
So I get set back from that center with 4 months left. And that's why I'm sitting in this 10 by 10 confinement cell. But
Mm-hmm.
what happened before that was there were still some things happening in Joseph's mind already, like some fears before that moment happened. I
Mm-hmm.
was sitting there with 4 months left of my sentence coming home thinking, man, I'm still getting high right now. And even though I'm trying to tell myself, don't worry, Joseph, when you get home, you'll put it away.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was also afraid. So I had some fears and some thoughts before that.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden I get sent back almost like I feel like I'm going to prison a third time. Cause if
Mm.
you violate and work release, they send you back to prison.
Yeah.
So
That
now
don't
I'm
feel good.
it don't feel good. So I remember even before I talked to this guy, I'm sitting in the van that they take you in and I'm shackled again. I almost feel like I'm getting arrested again.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm even thinking like, man, is this what I'm gonna do? Like I've been here so many times. These emotions running through my body, like what am I going to tell my family again? I've been visiting my family every weekend. They're thinking I'm doing good. And now all of a sudden, they're not going to get a phone call from me and they're going to wonder where I'm at again. Like
Mm.
it almost felt like I'm going to prison again.
Wow.
So those feelings come in, those emotions come in, and then I go into that cell and then I hear it. So it was almost because of the emotional things lining up to that when he looked at me, I said, dude, I have to right now. I
Yeah.
got 4 months left. If I don't make a change, this is where I have to. It
Wow.
almost, I feel like God put me in a place where I had, like, he almost put my back against the wall again and
Mm-hmm.
said, I'm going to let somebody talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people have done this before, but for some reason in that moment, I guess I always say God knew my heart was going to be open because I was
Yeah.
scared too. I was going to that time, my 10 cell scared again, going to
Yeah.
prison again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I believe was different was just the fact that it was some things leading up to it. And then when
Yeah.
that conversation hit,
Yeah.
I really paused and I said, I got to do something, man. I got to make a change.
Mm. Makes me think about a rhyme by Most Def, Mathematics, and he says in part of the rhyme he said, "Why did the one straw break the camel's back? Here's the secret: there were a million other straws underneath it." And it sounds
Mm-hmm.
like that was that final straw for you, almost like you were in probably one of the most darkest places you've been. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, it seems like
absolutely.
when we're in a dark place is like when we can really start to see the light. You know,
Yeah. And
that's
that's the
heavy.
thing about people too. We still have dark places in our lives today sometimes that we're in.
Mhm.
Maybe
Yeah,
they're not as dark and this is what I tell people when I share my story. It's like, they may feel like they can't relate because they're like, well, I'm not sitting in a cell. Well, everybody's darkness looks different. It could
absolutely.
be emotional pain. It could be
Mhm.
just you're going through something that's very difficult for you.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and I believe those are the moments in our lives that either shape us or they break us. They
absolutely. I'm
shape
with
you or
you.
break you.
Absolutely, I'm with you. And you know, and you said this word a couple times already that I think people don't pay attention to, which was emotions. You know, you talked about the emotions you experienced going back, being shackled, being back in that 10 by 10, and then just now, talking about these emotions. And I think really it's when we don't manage our emotions properly, we find ourselves in these precarious situations that could either make us or break us. And oftentimes we find unhealthy ways of coping with our emotions with cause us to cause harm to ourselves or to other people, you know.
Of
So
course. That's so great. And the
mhm,
other thing too, to add to that is we ignore our emotions by masking them with other stuff because our
absolutely.
emotions are there. And if we're not aware of those
Yeah,
emotions, like you said, and why are people not aware of them? And that's what I was, saying to add, because we're ignoring them and we're saying, okay, I'm sad. I say this all the time. Drugs and alcohol weren't my problem. They were just a reaction to my negative emotions and how
yeah.
I solved my problem. But today I could do the same thing. If I
Hmm.
have emotions and I want to ignore it, if I'm
Hmm.
stressed out,
Hmm.
and instead of really sitting back and pausing and saying, hold on a second, why am I getting so mad at my wife right now for something real small?
Yeah, yeah.
Instead of pausing, I might play the blame game,
Hmm.
or I might say, if she did this, if she did that, or I'm stressed out because of work. But and sometimes we want to ignore our especially men,
Yeah,
I struggle with that.
yeah,
Man, we don't
yeah,
gotta hide behind our emotions. I'm not soft. I'm not,
yeah,
no, I don't have no problems. I got
yeah,
this, I
yeah,
got
yeah.
this.
We've
And
been conditioned to be that way, and it's harmful
yeah,
to us and everyone that loves us.
yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, I was
Men
talking to.
sometimes think it's soft. I don't know why we think that. Like I don't want to talk about that, man. It's soft. It's like no,
It's
it's actually real.
Yeah. And so what if it's soft? I think what we have to do as men is learn to be soft. You know,
Mhm.
real quick, a good scenario or analogy I like to share when we talk about being soft and hard is this story of the oak tree. This oak tree was in a pasture next to a river, and it would always talk about how big and strong and beautiful it is, and how it doesn't bend, and it would always pick on the reeds, those tall grass-like plants that grow on the side of rivers and how they bend and they sway in the wind. And so he always picked on them. But one night a storm came through, heavy winds. And during the storm, the oak tree, because it was so rigid, it couldn't sway with the wind and it broke,
Mm.
you know.
Wow.
And so when the morning came, this beautiful oak tree was broken and it was dead. But here were the reeds. They were able to sway in the wind and be flexible. And
Yeah.
so I think it's important that we don't be hard and that we embrace this so-called softness or sensitivity because it's part of who we are, man. And I think when
Yeah.
we do that, we have increased chances of staying out of prison, making better decisions, and building community. You
Yeah.
heard? Yeah.
Oh man, that was so good, brother. That I love that analogy. It's we like you said, like somebody even said the other day about being. It reminded me about like marriage, and they say you're whipped, and I'm like, yeah, so what?
Hmm.
Like I'm not supposed to be with my wife,
Right.
and
Right.
it's like we have these terms, and I love that you said that. It's like if you call that soft, then that's right,
Hmm.
man. I'm soft. But I'd rather
Absolutely.
be soft, aware, and a good member of my society and present with my
Absolutely.
family than
Hmm.
be hard and end up back in prison or dead.
Right on, brother. Right on. And I think these are some messages that we have to definitely be able to live out and exemplify and show to our peers as well as to younger men and women, that we can still be full men, full people, but we are in touch with ourselves and with our community and with other people around us because we're what? We're communal animals, we're communal creatures. And so we need to be able to get along well with others,
Yeah,
man.
especially opening up. I always say like I'm vulnerable. I remember, I come from a culture of Middle Eastern, man. Mom and dad were born in Iraq,
Hmm.
and man, very manly men. Like, I mean, I've only seen my dad cry twice. The first
Hmm.
time was I was actually in prison, and the
Hmm.
second time was when his sister passed away.
Hmm.
We don't talk about what's going on in our life. So I grew up with that.
Yeah.
And so even when I got out of prison, I've always had a passion of wanting to share my message and my experience. Once I realized that I could use my past and give it a purpose, it gave
Yeah.
me this fire. I don't know if you ever heard of Eric Thomas, the hip hop preacher.
Yeah. 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 E.T.
E.T. So I'm from Detroit, so I love E.T. And
Yeah.
I listened to him, and I was inspired by how he used his story, and now he's
Mhm.
going to high schools, and I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
one thing I struggled with was hopping on social media and getting
Mhm.
vulnerable
Yeah.
because I was like, man, I don't really want to put out my stuff. But what I found was when I became vulnerable to other people, it
Hmm.
opened the door for them to be vulnerable to me. And
That's
when I
right.
figured that out,
Yeah. Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
I was just if you watch my Instagram every day, I'm just posting something. I don't care if the lighting's great, I'm in my truck half the time I'm driving. People are like, stop driving. I'm like, I'm looking at the road, man. I just had something on my mind I had to give to the world. And when
Absolutely.
you can be vulnerable to other people,
Hmm.
now you can be valuable and you can help people because now they're like, I have people in my life today that they even tell me, man, I don't really talk to anybody about this, but I feel for some reason comfortable. And I believe it's because I put my armor down with
Yeah,
them.
man.
They felt open to do
Yes,
that.
sir.
If more men can do that, man,
Uh-huh.
we'll create, like you said, a communal thing where we're just helping each other. We're
Yeah.
becoming better men, and we'll
Yep.
change the world.
Absolutely, man. And I think we'll have lower incidences of violence, addiction, incarceration, and all of that, you
That's
know.
right.
And if we could go back just a little in our discussion, you mentioned like when you were in that cell, man, you realized you couldn't do it for yourself. You decided to look to a power outside of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Why was it God versus, I don't know, something else? Like, what made you think, okay, I got to go to God, whatever your interpretation of God is, versus, I don't know, the big book or something else?
Yeah. So, I grew up knowing there was a God.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up knowing that there's a higher power out there, right?
Hmm.
I just ignored it. And
Yeah.
and at that moment, it was like, I mean, if I turn to a book or a person,
Hmm.
I feel like if I turn to a book, for example, well, that book can be taken from me. You
Right.
know what I mean? Especially in prison. If they steal
Hmm.
that book,
Hmm.
if you took my radio from me in
Hmm.
prison, I didn't know how. I probably would have had to go fight somebody to get a radio because I needed
Right.
it so bad.
Right.
And you could take that from me.
Hmm.
So I knew a power that's greater than me. You can't take that from me.
Hmm.
So, and I also knew that like, I still say this today. I believe in that there was a power. I ignored it.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I said, if there is a power out there, because, I have my own fears and my own doubts,
Hmm.
and of course, just being so lost in the world and
Yeah,
sucked
man.
up into the world, you start to really almost forget, like, is there a God? And not even actually think about that stuff.
Hmm.
And in this moment, I just really feel like I had no other choice. That
Hmm.
that if I can't do it for myself, what's crazy about the feelings I had in that moment, I knew I was about to get back on the prison compound in about 10 to 14 days. They were going to open that door and put me back on that compound. And if anybody knows obviously about prison, it's like the streets.
Yes, sir.
What I didn't understand was the fact that I didn't want to go out there and get high.
Hmm.
But there was this other part of me that was like, I might just say yes. Because you know how many times Joseph said he didn't want to get high? You know how many times
Hmm.
do we tell ourselves, I don't want to do something, but we do it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of listeners can identify with that point right there.
Yeah. There's so many, even today, it's like, and I'm not pushing my, in the program, some people get weird when I start talking about the Bible, but I ain't pushing this. This is just my book that I read that helps
Right.
me. Right.
Right. Right. Right.
And there's a part in the book that when I read this, I really related to it. And there's a guy named Paul, and he's talking about how he doesn't understand sin in his life. He says, man, I do the things I don't want to do, but the
Hmm.
things that I want to do, I don't do it. I'm at this battle every day. And
Yeah.
I don't understand it. And the reality of what he was talking about was he talks about how sin affects our life. And whether you want to call it sin, you want to call it your mind, you can interpret this any way you want to.
Right. Right.
And the way we think, we wanted, if everybody did what they wanted to do, I promise you that even me, if I did
Hmm.
everything I wanted to do every day, I'd live a different life.
Yeah.
But why do if I never want to get angry and yell? I never want to. But why do I do it sometimes?
Hmm.
It's this battle of constantly doing things. So I know for me, I need to be aware of that stuff.
Hmm.
But I do believe that there's a power greater than me that does
Hmm.
help me understand that stuff. He
Hmm.
helps me through the things. I reach out to him. I ask for the strength.
Yeah.
I can't do it on my own strength. And Joseph's done that before. I promise you, man, I've told myself, Craig, so many times,
Hmm.
that's it, man. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done. This is
Yeah.
what I'm going to do. Elaborate plan. I'm going to turn my phone off. I'm going to get a new number, change my Facebook. I'm going to change this. I'm going to tell these people don't talk to me because I got police following me. I create an elaborate plan to stop, and it don't work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So at some point, I got to say, all right, Joseph, you might be able to figure everything out, but you've tried to figure out how to stay sober, and you in prison with 37 felonies, going
Yeah.
back to prison for another 4 months.
Yeah.
And I feel like at that point, God was like, put your hands up, man.
I
Put your
need some
hands
help.
up. And yeah, put your hands up and just ask for it. And when
Yeah.
I did that, as I started learning about my higher power,
Hmm.
man, I would not be sitting in front of you right now if I didn't tune into that person.
That's dope, man. That's dope. Thanks for sharing that, yo.
Of
And
course,
so
man. Of course.
once you found yourself, getting out, once you stepped out, like, did you have like support networks, family, friends who were egging you on to do the right thing, helping you connect dots, or what was your Yeah, what was your impetus, or what was your foundation once you found yourself back on the bricks?
Yeah. So I did have family. Mom and dad obviously took me back into the house. But, this is what I always say, especially because, like, I know the listeners of yours, either they came out of prison,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they're dealing with somebody. It's funny because my family didn't understand addiction either. So, like, some
Mm-hmm.
people might say, oh, wow, Joseph, see, they compare. They'll start talking about how I don't have nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is the truth. My family, they supported me the way they wanted to, and they wanted me to go down the path that they wanted me to go down. So I got support for them when it came to doing what they wanted me to do. And what I mean by that is, my dad's a businessman. He wanted me to, I'm from Detroit, so I get out of prison. I'm in Jacksonville, and we're ready to move to Detroit in about 3 months to
Mm-hmm.
go operate a business together. Well, Detroit probably was not a good, I mean, I didn't end up moving, but I went back and visited, and I was there, and I realized this ain't a good place for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, I didn't know if I could make it there or not. I just
Yeah.
knew what I was doing for 3 months in Jacksonville, working on my recovery was working.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden now my parents don't understand addiction. It's not their responsibility to understand what's best, what works for me.
Right.
So I had my family that supported me. It took me into their house. And then the other people, what's funny is before that, I told you about how many times I tried to say I'm going to get sober.
Mm-hmm.
So before I went to prison the first time and the second time, in between there was stints of me trying to work on my recovery. Like, I heard that there was a place you can go to that's going to help you stay sober. And I was like, I just thought I'm going to show up and they're going to help me. And then they started talking about reflecting on your past. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
nah, I'm good. I don't want to talk about that stuff. So I met some people there, but I never really worked it. So when I got out, I reached out to somebody right away. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, hey, man, you still in that recovery thing? And
Mm-hmm.
they said, yeah. I said, man, I just got out of prison. And I said, all I know I got to do is stay sober, and it looks like you've been, ever since I left, it looks like 5-6 years you've done it. And
Mm-hmm.
he just told me, hey, man, come to this AA meeting. He brought me to a meeting, and I started getting around a group of men.
Mm-hmm.
There was about 75 to 80 men that morning. It was a Sunday morning, a meeting I still go to this morning. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching people, man, of all different, you got a businessman, you got a white guy, black guy, young guy, old guy, 2 years, 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
different group of people. And everybody's there for one reason, to help each other stay sober. And
Mm-hmm.
I was just looking at this. I was like, this is real. As crazy as I didn't know if it was real. I said, if this is real, this has got to be the dopest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Community.
it was community. That's exactly what it was. And that's what I was craving. I was craving community. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't do things alone. I
Right.
still can't do things alone today. I need community in my life. And that's the
Yeah.
other thing, we struggle with.
Yeah.
Isolation. We got this. Man,
Mm-hmm.
my wife still tells me today, hey, you've been struggling with this problem for a couple of days. Why don't you got a lot of people in your life, man, pick up the phone. I'm like, you're right, man. I
Yeah.
still got to remind myself, let me pick up the phone and call some of my boys and talk to them and get real with them.
Yeah. I think as human beings, we do better in community. We do better. We know more about ourselves. Our lives have greater meaning when we have supportive relationships.
Mm,
Earlier you talked about sharing your story, and I was thinking about the shortest distance between any two people is through sharing our stories. There's so many similarities. And one of the things that's similar always is our emotional experiences. Maybe not the
mhm,
external experiences, but our emotional reactions. And then I'm also thinking about community. And then when we break this word down, it's common unity, you know?
mm.
And so just really heavy. But before we run out of time, I want to ask you a couple of things. One is, what would be your advice to another person who is struggling with staying out of prison?
Yeah. So somebody who's struggling with staying out of prison means they're making the choices and they're not pausing and reflecting, and that's the thing is, like, whether you're selling drugs, doing drugs, committing crimes, if you can pause right now, like if that person was listening, I'll tell them to pause right now and ask them what they're doing in their life,
Mm-hmm.
and ask them, is it possible? Is there a possibility you can end up back in prison?
Mm-hmm.
And the second part of that question that you'll be surprised how many people answer differently is, if you go back to prison, are you okay with that? Is
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing right now worth, if I were to tell you you might end up in prison in a year or two, and you might end up there for 10 years, 15, 5, is it worth it? Some people might tell you, I don't care. That's the sad part.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if I believe that they don't care. I
Mm-hmm.
just believe they think there's not another way to get it.
Mm.
And what's crazy I found, listen, man, when you're in prison, there's some sharp people. I
Sure
mean,
enough.
man, it is like I've met people that sold a lot of drugs, that committed epic crimes, and when you sit down and think about the elaborate stuff that they did and created to make things move and shake, and then you think about how they're operating a prison. I'm telling you, man, these guys are smart. They got
Look,
gifts.
bruh, I met the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life in prison, and
100%.
still, I've been in college for like a long time. I've earned a doctorate degree, a master's degree, undergrad, but hands down, the smartest people I've ever met have been those men in prison. So I'm feeling you.
Now, Craig, you know what's funny about it is I tell some guy the other day, I said, you know, we all got gifts, man. God's given us gifts. And what I think about a lot of the people that are in prison is people just think they're criminals, but they're not. They're just people who have not been utilizing God gifts the way they're supposed to. So you think about me, I'm a businessman now, right? I get out of prison, 5 years. This is about almost 6 years now. And I operate a business with 16 employees, and we do about $5 million in business.
Dope.
Now, what's crazy about it is when I was in prison, I had to operate the same way I'm operating my business now. What do I mean by that? If you need to get something to be done, you can't do it by yourself. You might need some movers, right? You need people to move things around. So you say, okay, I got $50 and I'm trying to make another 50. So I'm gonna give you 25 and you 25. You guys go make me 50, and now I'm gonna make me 200. So and then once I make 200, I'm gonna give you $30 to take care of this problem, and I would utilize the people around me to accomplish a goal. Well, guess what that is? That's entrepreneurship, man.
Absolutely.
You ever meet somebody who sells, whether they sell drugs or they operate like that, I'm telling you, they got an entrepreneurship mindset.
Absolutely.
The problem is they believe because they have a felony on their record that they're not going to be able to make it. They're different.
Right.
But that's a lie, man. That's such a lie. Is look, you can get out and you take your gifts and say, look, if I'm going to make a decision, I'm going to make a decision to make sure this ain't going to land me back in prison. And watch how much you will operate. A lot of the people I know, I got a buddy who does trucking. I got a buddy who does concrete work. I got a buddy who does roofing. And they're all felons. They all been to prison. And I'm telling you that I still go into prisons today because, man, there's some people in there that got God's gift.
All
and
of
they just
them
need
do.
to know that they just need to know that you got a gift. You're right. All of them do.
Absolutely.
Just use your gift in a different way.
And I think in part, not just that, sometimes folks have not had opportunities to recognize their gifts, you know, and I think you said a very powerful piece, which is pause. You know, sometimes we have to pause. We have to cut off the noise that's happening around us. You know, sometimes we have to isolate for a day or a few hours each day. I like to get up early in the morning when it's quiet. That's my time to pause, to reflect. But I think it's so important that we do that. So, you know, that's powerful that you dropped that. Another piece I'd like to ask you is to consider, you know, if your journey from addiction to incarceration to now being a businessman, how would you capture that, say, in a catchphrase or a title? Say, if you were writing a essay or a book about your journey, what would that be entitled?
So there's two quotes that came to my mind when you said that.
Mm-hmm.
And number one, it's trust the process, don't rush the process. I always
That's
wanted
dope.
things to happen today, instead of realizing like, man, life is just a process, you know? And because the reality is, like, we always think that life is supposed to be easy, but it's in the process through life that we're actually learning. You know,
Yes,
we
sir.
think we get to this goal, and that's what I was always trying to accomplish, this place. Like, I thought there was this place that I would get to, and once I get to that place, I'll be great. But it's not
Yeah,
the place that
yeah.
you get to. It's the process of actually accomplishing that.
The
That's even more
journey.
beautiful than getting to that place.
Yeah.
And then the second part is, if I hide my story, I hide God's glory. And
Ooh.
the reason why that one's such a powerful one, man, is because I was always ashamed of my story. I was always ashamed of my past. And once I realized the past is the greatest possession that I carry, you know, with my past comes experience. With my experience comes hope, comes inspiration. So that's that. Now, even I have a T-shirt now that says, "If you hide your story, you hide God's glory." Because,
Yo, that's dope.
yeah, dude, send me your stuff. I'll send you a shirt. I promise you, man. It's my word. But
Okay.
And it's so important because I was always ashamed of my past. And I think a lot of your listeners will relate to this because, even now, when you think about people who came out of prison, we feel like the society is looking at us different.
Yep.
But whether you came out of prison or whether you're black or you're white or you're a boy or a girl, people will look at you different no matter what the situation is.
Sure enough.
But if you allow your story to use it to say, yeah, man, I came out of prison and I got a felony.
Right.
But I remember my probation officer, I was on probation for 2 years. She said to me, she said, Joseph, do you know that at your pace where you're at today, at your age, if I were to statistically tell you with somebody who's been to prison twice and now they're on probation for 2 years in the state of Florida, there's an 85% chance you go back. And I looked at her with a smile and I said, you know what that means, ma'am? She said, what does that mean? I said, that means 15% don't come back. And I smiled and I looked at her. I said, so I'm part of that 15%. And it was almost like I knew. I was like, I'm going to be different. You know what?
Yeah.
Maybe maybe felony is hard. Maybe being a felon is hard.
Yeah.
Maybe all this stuff is hard, but guess what? I'm going to change it.
Absolutely.
So I used it instead of allowing it to it's like doing your time or let your time do you. I'm going to do my time. I'm going to make this worth it.
Dope. That's dope, man. And so wrapping up, Joseph, how can people reach you?
Everywhere on all social media platforms, like if I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, which is Joseph Kajy, Kajy. And what I always say about reaching me is like, go on the platform and shoot me a DM.
Yeah.
The reason why I don't have a coaching program, man, I'm not selling anything. I'm not selling a book. Like maybe one day there will be something, that I will utilize. But today in my life, it's just to connect with people. That's my biggest passion. Is I'm not out here to share my story to promote like a book or nothing. It's really, I want to connect with community. I want to talk to guys who just got out of prison and were like, hey, bro, I need some help about starting a business maybe, or even just talk about, man, how do you go through being denied on an application? I'm really stressed out about finding a job. We all need somebody to talk to, we all need somebody to talk and that can relate to us.
Absolutely.
So if you got out of prison or there's some things you're going through, I can relate to you. And I do. I talk to a lot of people, man, and I don't ever say no. So that's where you can find me, is reach out to me there. I have a podcast called Let's Get Real with Joseph Kajy. It's currently about to be in all the prisons in Florida. So guys in the prison will be able to listen to it too. But that's where they can find me, man. I really want to connect with people.
All right. Right on, man. Yo, man, it's been a pleasure connecting with you today. And I really appreciate you sharing your story. I really enjoyed us chopping it up. And I'll be in touch with you, man.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you for just allowing this platform to giving me this platform, and for you taking your time, because people are utilizing it, and hopefully people are listening, man. Thank you.
Man. Thank you, man. And so that's a wrap, bro.
All right, brother.
All right, brother. I will be in touch.
Absolutely, man. I enjoyed it.